want to build that trend before you really do anything wildly outside the norm, but after you understand what's typical for you and what you're running.
Green flag.
Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
This episode is brought to you by Deechworks Fuel Systems. Visit deechworks.com to fuel your passion. On this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, we're going to talk about oil. It happens to be my favorite thing to get into in a Facebook group and troll folks on. So I'm probably going to get a really good education, and I might stop trolling people about it. Joining me, senior oil analyst, host of the Slick Talk podcast. I think he's probably held every job at Blackstone Labs, it looked like when I was internet stalking him. Joe Adams, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime. Wow. I've been using Blackstone off and on for probably 20 years between my motorcycles, street cars, race cars. I actually haven't sent an oil sample out for this race car, but it didn't seem to be having any issues. Not that you need to have issues to, set a baseline, but I built it in a rush and I haven't really done what I should be doing with it sometimes. So, yeah, but let's talk about how you got into this oil analysis game.
Yeah, so coming out of college with a communications degree, I knew that I could create content in a variety of ways, but what that content was going to be was unknown at that point. But then I found Blackstone, and they were looking for report writers. And Blackstone's philosophy on that is understanding that it's easier to find someone who can write well and teach them how to talk about all the things that go into oil analysis than it is to find someone who knows how to do all the oil analysis, but then also can apply it and communicate it to everyone that uses the business. So they found that hiring folks who could write well, absorb a lot of information, and then spit it back out was the way to go. So fortunately, I've been a great fit, both as an analyst and someone who spreads the good news of oil analysis, be that in the form of a podcast, a report, a social media project, so on and so forth.
Yeah. And how long have you been with Blackstone?
Blackstone can analyze oil. Any system that needs oil to do its job is a candidate, but it doesn't stop there. We can also test coolant or fuel, be it diesel fuel or gasoline. But the vast majority of the samples that come in the door are oil, usually from a gasoline or a diesel engine. We also get into aircraft and marine applications. But if it needs oil to do its job, then Blackstone can help, both be it in the form of just your daily diagnostic tool, or if you are suspicious of a particular problem and you want to verify it on a microscopic level, we're here for it.
Okay. So let's talk about where most of the audience is. They do high performance driving events. They drive race cars. They do time attack type things. We're very track centric here. So what are those concerns we would have that we would want to go to Blackstone with?
Well, on top of monitoring the things that really any application needs to be wary of, be it how is my engine wearing? Is it making more metal than it should? And is that due to the presence or lack thereof of contaminants like coolant, excess dirt, fuel? That really applies to anyone, but especially when it comes to racing and all the demands that an oil is exposed to in the process of keeping an engine clean, cool, and lubricated. Oil analysis is invaluable in catching a problem, especially early on, before you've thrown a rod, before you've run into another rebuild that you didn't want to do. anytime you are adding power, you are dealing with aftermarket parts, seeing how the engine is responding to a tune, or if you are, again, rebuilding, you're switching out various components, seeing how the engine is handling it.
Mhm.
That's really where we come in handy.
Yeah. So I've always, for a long time, I was riding a motorcycle every day, 365, right? And they don't tend to run high mileage, generally speaking. So we were sending out things every third oil change just to see how much, if at all, the wear had increased, right? And that was big for me. And on the racetrack, we do lots of crazy things, right? If you're detuning an engine, you could be washing your rings, but you could know that if you do an oil analysis and the gasoline particulate level is pretty high, you may have to go retune after that. It's an indicator, right? But we do lots of little things.
Yeah, whether that be fuel or even, an unusually high chrome level from the rings themselves, other cylinder area metals, a lot of different indicators there that can speak to a problem in that area.
So when you get your Blackstone report, will it indicate by engine essentially? Because you have to put all that those particulars in your request. Will it tell you what areas are worn, or will you have to do that research?
Yeah, so what we want to do is dial in as precise a comparison as possible. So knowing what you've sampled is key, knowing the exact model, because we want to put up specific averages for comparison, let you see, okay, how is this engine wearing compared to others of that type, not just every gasoline engine under the sun or every motorcycle engine under the sun. Because we understand that not all of these are made the same. Some of them generate more metal than others, not due to a problem, just due to the metallurgy that the manufacturer favors. So we will go through the metals and see how they look compared to other engines of that type. And we'll even go so far as to dial it in to those being used in racing applications, if applicable, those that are running leaded fuel, if applicable, just to get you as close a match early on. Because as you build trends, we understand what's going to be typical for you and your engine, because not only are models made differently, but even if you take two of the same model and put two different drivers behind the wheel, odds are good there's going to be some variations in use. So we start with that average specific to what it is you've got, and then we build trends to help you understand what's normal.
Okay. That's good to know because, I have lots of races on this engine, but I'd love to see where it's at and then see what we're doing as we work down the line. I don't know. What do you guys recommend for an interval for a race or track specific engine to send in stuff?
The baseline is really particular to you. I would say to sample what it is you are doing regularly up to that point in your maintenance plan. We don't want you to suddenly shift from what you've been doing. We may find that you need to dial it back, or we may find that if you're interested, you can do more than you are between oil changes. I would say it's pretty common to see people sample a track weekend or two, and then maybe they throw in some daily driver usage on top of that. And that's a reasonable way to go about it. I think you certainly don't want your baseline sample to be new territory for you and the engine. Let's start with what you normally do. And obviously that answer is going to vary depending on who you are. But in general, we see that normal be the 1 to 2 track weekends. Something in the ballpark of 5-10 hours even wouldn't be crazy. And then we will build from there or subtract if need be. I would just like to stress that people take that baseline in accordance with their norm, and that will go a long way in helping us build the ideal interval for you moving forward.
Yeah. I personally do every other race weekend, though things are probably going to change. I had a cheap moment in my life. Normally I run Motul, and we were rushing, and I got a case of the VR1, the Valvoline,
Yep. Mhm.
And previous, I run a K20Z3. The engine revs to 8,800, and before, over the course of a weekend, I might burn half a quart, which is kind of normal considering how high we're spinning it and in the pressures and stuff. That seems normal to me. But for whatever reason, I was cheap and I was going to try this new oil and completely drain the old stuff, put in the new stuff, and it was burning a quart a session essentially.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, this engine doesn't like this. So I immediately went down to the pro shop at the local track, bought Motul, put it in, and it slowed it down. And then once I changed everything out, it was good to go. Do you guys find that some engines, and not even another K20 could take it no problem, but it's just in particular, some engines don't like some oils?
Well, when it comes to consumption, how quickly they're going to burn, that can really vary on a case-by-case basis. And it's hard to be sure why some will do that more than others. There's a lot that goes into API certification, which is really, the main thing you want to look for when you buy oils. That's API certified. But beyond that, when it comes to Blackstone, what we can see in testing about an oil, we can see the additive package, and we can see things like viscosity and how that oil has broken down over time, whether that be in the form of a thick or thin viscosity, a high insolubles level, etc. But there's a whole mess of data points that go into an oil being API certified, things like shear stability and factors that could speak to why some are getting burnt quickly, or at least quicker than others. But in terms of what we're seeing, it's hard to explain why that might accelerate. But we can see whether or not that consumption, that breakdown, whether or not that has actually done harm to wearing parts. So obviously you want to monitor consumption and top off when needed. You can try different oils, see if some are slower to burn than others. But one thing you can rest assured knowing when you send in the used oil is knowing, okay, it burnt quicker, but did I actually run into any harm to internal parts? Did the engine still wear well? Because honestly, it probably is going to be okay if you top off as needed. But obviously, you don't want to be doing that all the time. It can be a pain. So experiment with what you want. Find the oil that works best for you, and we'll let you know how it's been taking care of the engine's internals and if that breakdown is coinciding with anything concerning, on a microscopic level.
Yeah. So you touched on some things with viscosity and additive packages and things. And so I sort of want to talk about some of my favorite trolling of the internet because
all right.
I do it once a year and it's not on April 1st, but they will see, I'll be like, yep, just topped off, ready for the season. And they will see a can of like 5W30 Motul and a 1550. And somebody's like, you can't mix those. And I was like, I do it all the time and my engines seem fine. So why don't you leave me alone about it? And it will enrage people that I have now mixed two different viscosities and potentially, because I don't know the difference between the two additive packets, but additives also. So do you see that a lot? Do you see people who write in and I'm like, yeah, I put 5 quarts in my engine and it's 2 5W30s and 3 1550s.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of people use our services just to see what it will look like if they mix a quart of Royal Purple with Pennzoil, with Kirkland. I mean, people are obsessed with finding that secret sauce.
Yep.
Yeah, and this goes in all walks of life. People want to craft their own and forge their own path, and that applies to oil. And I'll say that, again, you can obsess all you want over like the level of calcium or the level of zinc and phosphorus. But there's so much that goes into getting a product certified that you can rest assured if it's got that certification, it's got enough additive. And on the and on the other hand, if you want to throw a couple together purely out of necessity, let's say you've got 4 quarts on the shelf of one brand, 1 quart of another, you have a 5-quart sump. Generally, it's fine to mix them, really. So no need to be terrified of it. And if you're someone who wants to experiment, we certainly know a lot of folks who do. But at the end of the day, you can be confident that the oil on the shelf has plenty of additive packed in it, just ready to use.
Yeah, so my witch's brew is it just came because I take notes, or at least at that time I was taking a lot of notes specifically about what was going in my engine, and it was, burning a little here or there, and I totally forgot to bring my backup, my black and yellow tub full of all my fluids. So again, I'm running down to the pro shop and all they had was 1550, and I was like, okay, wet's wet at this point. I got to have something, right?
Yeah.
So I poured it in, before the weekend started. And when the weekend was over, I basically hadn't burned any. And it had only taken, I don't know, maybe a quart and a half or so of it. I don't have my notes in front of me for that. So, but I was like, okay, I'm going to start using this. And then I decided I do data for a living. I'm going to nerd a formula for myself. And that's what I do. And I know I'm not the only one, but the amount of heat that I catch on the internet is astronomical. And I know they're all doing it. They probably have an additive package that they're adding to their already done stuff, right? They're using Z-Max or the liquid moly stuff or whatever they're trying to add to it, right? I know people are doing it, or the stuff wouldn't be out there, right?
Right.
I see it in the trash can at the track. It's not like you're not doing it. So what's the difference between me mixing two of the same brand, but just 2 different weights? That's one of my favorite things to do every year, and it catches people every single year. It's very popular.
Yeah, I mean, unless they can show that they have the same exact engine as you, and that's wearing less over a longer period of time, there's really no ground to stand on.
Right. And even then, it's how am I using it? Are you running full bore? Am I running detuned? It has to be really, really close on a lot of parameters.
Right.
Excuse me. So when you guys get oil reports from racers, what are we normally seeing in those reports?
Well, the norm can really vary quite a bit because some engines respond well to harder use and some simply don't. So I would say what we would like to see on a case-by-case basis would be an engine that's wearing consistently, because even when they're raced, even when they're seeing much more demanding use than just their street-driven counterparts, like we see a lot of like EJ25s, for example. Well, some owners have it dialed in such a way where the engines don't make all that much metal compared to their street-driven versions. And they tend to wear, not only are they not making a lot of metal, but consistently they're wearing similarly on a per mile basis from one oil run to another. And that's what you want to see regardless of whether it's racing or not. You want to see the engine produce metal at a consistent rate, because when it starts wearing erratically, that's when you suspect a problem. I would say when it comes to racing, you might see obviously a spike in lead here or there, either because the bearings are wearing more than they should, or people will toss in some octane booster or some fuel at the track that will cause a spike in that element. But as long as we know you're going to the track, racing is a fact of life, we can factor that in and bring up the possibility in our comments, say, hey, are you running lead fuel? Did you throw in any product at all that might contain lead? Because that would be a pretty normal thing to see here or there. But yeah, I would say some engines just respond well enough to it that you wouldn't necessarily, if you had no details surrounding the car, you might not even guess that's being raced. But on the other hand, some engines, maybe there's been too much power added and they're wearing really heavily as a result. But yeah, I would say the norm can really vary depending on not only what it is, but how you're taking care of it.
So there's a big debate in my paddock. Some of us are over the top with knowing about our oil pressure and temperatures, and others are like, I'll figure it out when the engine lets go. Okay. So in a lab report, how do we know that we're getting it too hot?
Well, when it comes to excess heat, you can see that affect the oil in a couple of ways. Chiefly, the viscosity can thicken up. And as the oil is thickening up, it can also become overly oxidized. And that's when the oil is actually becoming solid. So it happens ideally at a slow rate. Oil is going to oxidize no matter what application. And that's what the oil filter is there for, is to remove those oxidized solids from circulation. So you can see the oil thicken. You can also see those solids become way too high, circulating in the oil to the point the oil filter can no longer remove them. So you can see a high insolubles level as well. And then an offshoot of that, the thick viscosity, high insolubles, you can also see the engine wear more than it was previously due to those solids turning the oil abrasive and preventing it from cleaning and lubricating like it otherwise would.
Yeah, so it basically runs around like microscopic sand in there, right?
Yeah, small, you're talking about like, in terms of sample volume, like 0.6% of the sample. Once that is solid material, that is what we consider high in our book. So that's how small we're talking, 0.6% out of a 3.5 ounce size sample.
Okay. I see a lot of people like me like to be cheap sometimes. And they'll be like, oh, I want to run a Rotella diesel oil. I don't want to run a Motul. What's the big difference between like a normal off the shelf oil and then what's deemed the race oil, or what's usually labeled race oil?
Race oils can have some pretty funky additive packages. You can see like a lot of molybdenum, for example, which is an anti-wear additive. Other anti-wear additives are boron, zinc, and phosphorus. Zinc and phosphorus make up, the common additive ZDDP, if you ever see that thrown around, and people will really obsess over how much ZDDP is there. So race oils can have a lot of anti-wear predominantly. That's, I would say, if you think about it in other terms, like a gasoline engine oil that's not quote unquote racing might have like 800 or 900 parts per million of zinc phosphorus. And then racing oils, you can see some blends with well upwards of 1,000. So it's going to be packed with additive for anti-wear purposes. That would probably be the main distinction, I would say, on our end.
Okay. I have a lot of cost-effective friends, let's put it that way. And they're always like, I don't want to pay XYZ or whatever. I'm like, you're racing cars. You know how much money you're spending already? Like, don't be cheap with this stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been that way. I'm like, oh, the VR1 is much cheaper than Motul, or, like 60% the cost of Motul. So I'm going to give it a whirl. Right? Everybody gets caught that way. And so I just wanted people to understand what is in it and what isn't in it, because they can go to Walmart and they get that, whatever the Walmart brand is for oil. And I've seen it. I've seen it in jugs, Yeah.
And I understand, like, you've got to run what you like. And that even extends to us at Blackstone in the sense that we have our own standbys. Like, for example, I won't run an oil that uses sodium in the additive package strictly because that element is also contained in coolant. So I don't want there being any ambiguity about where my sodium is coming from. be it additive or not. So yeah, you're going to have different, I guess, governing factors in the decision making, and we all do.
Yeah. So let's get a little bit into the transmission, mostly because at the racetrack, most of us are using plate differentials. And so we get transmission fluid and then we add our own stuff. And I see this question all the time, is always like, what transmission should I use or fluid should I use? And my response on the internet or when people DM me and ask me is whatever your diff manufacturer recommended. When you guys get transmission fluid to test, what are some of the things you guys are looking at and able to identify?
So some transmissions, especially those that whether they be automatics, CVTs, they can be very sensitive to the particular oil in use. There's less room to play, I think, when it comes to transmissions compared to engines, or even if you just talk about splash-based lubrication systems compared to an automatic or a CVT. We had like a CVT apart in the garage, and it's amazing how intricate the oil passages are. And those systems can be very sensitive to the wrong fluid being in use. And on that note, we definitely want to see if it is a system that we know what oil it should be running and we know that the oil doesn't look right. That is one area where it's very good to point out, especially Nissan CVTs. We see those a lot. Those need a very particular fluid, and we're familiar with the additive package they need. So when we see those, it's often a concern whether or not the correct fluid is in use, less so than you'll see on the engine side, let's say.
Right. So we were talking about the solid parts per million. I would assume that in the transmission, especially one with intricate oiling passages, that would be a huge issue.
Yeah. They can't handle much solid material at all. So I talked about like 0.6% being high for engine oil. Transmission, if it's automatic, you don't want more than 0.1. So really keeping a close eye on the solids that are present is key. And that is why, in addition to having averages for the model you're sampling, we have an understanding of what the physical properties of the fluid or the oil itself should have relative to that application. So we have an ideal range for ATF, for a gear lube, knowing exactly what that fluid should look like physically. So that way you have an understanding there too, not just wear metals, but the oil's physical properties.
Okay. I know, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but a lot of people say that when you run a plate differential and you run a friction modifier, that it's worse for your synchros.
Okay.
I just don't know. Do you guys take that into account when you're doing a manual transmission fluid that's noted as coming from a race car, or because I feel like you're going to see a lot of high carbon or brass in it. I've never actually sent my transmission fluid in, but so I don't know what one of those reports looks like. But when we're using friction modifiers in addition to our fluid, is that, I'm sure we need to note that in our packages, right, that we send in?
Always good to know if there's been additives in use, anything that can affect the elements we find in the spectral analysis. But the nice thing is that wear metals, those that would show brass wear, we're not going to, or I should say those additives won't prevent normally us from being able to evaluate those metals. But there's always new additives and new recipes that come into play. So knowing whether or not those are there is certainly good, because we want to be able to point out, hey, we're seeing these increases and we want to, as best we can, rule out the additive having a role in those increases, because whether or not the additive is to blame, understanding how that system is wearing, if it's wearing more than it should, that way we can go down the list and cross off possible explanations. Are you running an additive that appears to be coinciding with wear increasing? Okay, then let's address that. Okay, you're not using additive, then this must just be a strictly wear related issue. We want to go down the list and help you cross off possible explanations for whatever could be causing poor wear.
Okay. It's sort of like you guys are operating a little blind sometimes if the customer isn't fully open to what they're doing, and they're opening the book up instead of you being in a fact finding and root cause type of situation. You're in a choose your own adventure book that it looks like they're changing things. You just won't know what's coming. And so you're going to get your report back, and your report could say, it's probably okay, but it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, and they could all be in 3 different directions. So,
yeah, some people are either in the gotcha mode where they're like, well, I sent you a sample with no paperwork, you should know what it is. And then some people will be truly just forgetful, and then some people will not want to put all the information there for whatever reason they may have. And that just sort of informs the writing style. For me in the report, if I'm in a field of unknowns, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to say, okay, here's what we have that does look like it could show a problem. Now let's fill in the blanks, and I'll reevaluate. And that will often get people's, gears turning as far as being like, okay, well, I do want to know what could be a problem. So now I'll tell you what I'm running. Now I'll tell you, the hours, the miles on it, the specific model, the fluid. Now let's go again. And then we'll get it dialed in. So we're understanding that people can really be coming from a lot of different places, whether that be, truly just interested in what we can tell without having the details. And that can be quite a bit. But I'll just take a broad stroke approach in those cases and say, we are seeing things that, depending on the model, depending on the interval, could be a problem. If you want to fill in the blanks, I'll be happy to, take another look, and we'll dial in a more specific comparison.
Okay. So I have another question, because it actually happened to me this year on both the engine and the transmission. I run a magnet plug in both of them, and the engine came back a little goopy, and then the transmission was a disaster, but we figured that one out. Does running a magnet alter the sample, or is it at such a microscopic level it doesn't matter?
So it mainly is good for collecting the visible stuff that's too big for a spectrometer to catch. But with that being said, knowing that's there is useful in the sense that some cases you will see a slight difference in how much iron is showing up in a sample where they have a magnetic plug catching that steel, that visible stuff. But in general, that's mainly impacting what you can see without a spectrometer.
Okay.
But with that being said, some problems can register visibly. So you want to, of course, monitor that carefully on your end. Let us know, hey, I'm seeing more on the plug than normal. And then, of course, we'll go into the part per million and see if there is a corresponding problem on that end. Usually, if there's a problem making visible metal, it makes a lot of the small stuff too.
Okay.
So those often go hand in hand.
Okay. I just didn't know if potentially it could be holding some of that parts per million back to a point where it may not be that visible. But at the same time, I don't know anybody who'd stop because it's their visual indicator, right? That's like, hey, we need to go look through this engine and see what's going on. So,
yeah, good to know about. But usually we should be able to see that problem on our end.
Okay. Let's talk race car oiling best practices. So you talked early on to about setting your interval. But and then as that history builds up with you guys, you can alter it, go longer, go shorter, depending on how things are going. What are some other best practices that we can be using, as racers and track enthusiasts to make sure that engines aren't cheap anymore? Okay. Like there's no cheap engines out there. Once you get a cheap engine, you probably have to rebuild it. So there's no off the shelf, $500 engine that seems to be ready to go anymore. So we want to really set the table, and they're, I hate to call them investments because they're depreciating assets, right? But if you're going to spend the money, you want it to last as long as it can last. So are there some best practices for us?
Yeah, I would say number one, you want to build that trend before you really do anything wildly outside the norm. But after you understand what's typical for you and what you're running, monitoring how that engine, that transmission is responding to changes you make. If you make mods, if you decide that you want to extend your oil change interval, tacking on another weekend or two, checking to see how that system is responding is really crucial, because you may think, well, I had good results after a few weekends, so I'm just going to let it go, and we'll see how things look next year. Or I have an aftermarket cam now, and last one was fine. I won't really need to keep an eye on it. Things like that. We always want to see how a system is responding to change, because that's how you can catch a wear-related problem. And of course, with every sample, you're able to see, is contamination becoming part of the mix? Because contamination that's caught on a microscopic level, that's far before you'll start seeing the visible signs on your end. So I think about it like in a two-prong way, where any change from the norm is one to keep an eye on. And then with every sample, you're getting a heads-up look at whether or not there are issues creeping in, whether that be a tiny amount of coolant when a leak is slight before you start seeing irregularities visibly, or noticing an obvious drop in the coolant reservoir, let's say. And then keeping an eye for just the standard contaminants, fuel, excess dirt. Those are the enemies that when they are there microscopically, they start to do damage. And then when you start seeing things visibly on your end, that's generally when a problem is really far gone.
Yeah. When we see it, sometimes it's as easy as, it just needs to be rerung or mic'd and put new bearings in, right? That's the best case scenario when we start to see it. So when we see it on the magnet, that's what we can be hoping for. If you can catch it before then, it's huge. Now for us racers, we run water, not coolant. So if we're running water, will you be able to see that in the oil itself also?
Yeah, it will show up visibly if it is to the point where the engine cannot burn it off. It can still register. And then even coolants where it's not glycol based, sometimes you'll see traces of sodium there still from the water make an appearance in the used oil. But water, when it's present, getting in there in any form, be that glycol-based coolant or not, can speed up and cause the oil to oxidize quicker than it otherwise would. So the presence of water in any form can still impact the physical properties. So even if you're not running the coolants that we typically see, you can see the impact of moisture getting in the system and wreaking havoc basically on the oil's physical properties and, of course, the engine.
Okay. So if I was somebody who ran distilled water and redline water wetter, you would recommend I write that out as something that I use just so you're aware, especially if you think something might be going on with use.
Right. Yeah. You're spot on. And I would also let people know that, these are products that we're familiar with as far as you won't be the first to run that setup. So we do have familiarity with those, and it's definitely not foreign territory for us.
Yeah. As much voodoo as we want to say we act with our oil and all that, there's only so many oils, and there's so many more people playing around with stuff that almost every product I'm sure you guys have seen, whether you saw it first and you were at SEMA or PRI or whatever, and you're like, let's get our hands on it and look at it. And then also customers, I bet day of release, 1 track weekend after release of something, you guys have already got a report of it coming in. So
yeah, we see a lot, but we also run into so many cases where people might be hesitant to let us know the details behind their setup, and just know that whatever your setup is, your report belongs to you. So, we won't be sharing it with just anyone in the forums and online. So yeah, let us know what you got, because it will still remain exclusive to you and what you're running. But all the more detail we have, the better and more effective, your report will be for you.
For sure. Nobody's got a clearance here, for oil anyway. And so I just never understood that. Now, maybe you're not going to get judged either, because like you said earlier, you're not the first person to do it. Right. So there's no, just be open. That way your report is the most accurate. I think that's the biggest thing. Literally nothing to hide. I would write down any day of the week what I was actually using, just to make sure that my report was accurate. Because in the end, it's between you and Blackstone, not it's not, like you said, it's not getting published. We're not outing anybody. Nobody's outing anybody over it. It's just an analysis of your particular situation. So
that's right on.
Anything else you can think of for us in oil and oil analysis?
I think we've given them quite a bit today, but yeah, I would say if there's anything that I'd want to reassure people of, it's that whether you are brand new to this or you're someone who's done a lot of online research, we meet you where you're at. So if you have any interest in this, all you have to do is let us know where you're coming from, what it is you're interested in, whether that be you're concerned about, you thinking you might have spun a rod, or you're about to, or you're wondering if there's any particular issue with your setup. We're here to help, and our entire goal is to make sure that it's easy to understand. So we're completely accessible and ready to help.
Awesome, Joe. I really appreciate you coming on this afternoon. I love oil. I love the voodoo aspect. I love there's so much to it, yet in the end, it's so simple, right? You have the oil, you have your additives, and you have your application. And to make sure it's all right, you probably should be getting it looked at,
Yep. If it does the job of cleaning and lubricating and cooling, then it only makes sense that testing it will tell you a lot about what it's taken care of.
All right, Joe, I appreciate you coming on, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.